And I certainly think that the plummeting of Justin Trudeau popularity is really primarily about his government, which has become very unpopular because all of the results of that government are bad. It isn't just that it became unpopular in and of itself, but to the point where Justin Trudeau has been forced out by his own party.
Earlier this week, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that he would be resigning. This was a cause for relief for many, myself included, but it was not much of a surprise. The 53-year-old Canadian Prime Minister, who had led Canada down a frightening path of left-wing woke policies, had simply worn out his welcome. Incredibly, after 9 years in office, the son of a former Prime Minister, who was elected because he was found to be charming and had a good head of hair, despite having no relevant experience, had lost the confidence not only of the Conservatives in Canada, but of his own Liberal Party. The party was set to have a vote of no confidence, which Trudeau wanted desperately to avoid. At the same time, President Trump began putting tremendous pressure on Canada and Trudeau, calling Prime Minister Trudeau governor, threatening 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican goods unless they curb the flow of drugs and migrants, lamenting that the U.S. spends about $200 billion a year protecting Canada, according to Trump, and stating that the U.S. doesn't actually need Canadian lumber or cars or dairy, and concluding that maybe Canada should just be the 51st state. Well, this has gotten a good laugh here in the United States, as no one believes Canada will become part of the United States. It's clear that the president is sending signals to Canada and Trudeau. Trudeau immediately rushed down to Mar-a-Lago after the initial comments, but nothing came from that other than an awkward photo op. For me, this is trademark Trump. Let it be known that you're coming after the policies between the United States and Canada. Let it be obvious that Prime Minister Trudeau won't be able to hang with President Trump. Set up Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre to win there, and then renegotiate the terms of our various trade and defense deals with Canada from a position of strength. But Trump's statements were clearly not taken well in Canada. With us to discuss the fall of Trudeau, the rise of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, the relationship between the United States and Canada, and how Trump's comments are being viewed in Canada is none other than the former Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper served as Prime Minister for 9 years, from 2006 to 2015. He was the leader of Canada's Conservative Party. His leadership was filled with strong fiscal and economic policies, drill baby drill, and was supportive of Western democracies around the world, including, of course, the United States and Israel. While much is written about what's happening in Canada in American media, not much is actually being said. Because while Canada is just to our north, admittedly, we don't really understand the dynamics of politics in Canada really well. And with Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, lining up to hopefully take over in the coming months as Prime Minister, his party today is up about 24% in the polls. The dynamic and charismatic Conservative leader is set to be the one dealing with Trump 47. I'm incredibly excited that the former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, has agreed to come on our show to break this all down. This is Standpoint, and I'm Gabe Groisman. Prime Minister Stephen Harper, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Gabe.
First of all, it's just such an honor to have you. I mean, first of all, I've been a big fan of you for so many years. In your time as Prime Minister, your support for opening for trade with the United States, economic responsibility, of course, your support for the state of Israel, which is near and dear to my heart. Really been watching you for a long time, and every single day now, as we open the newspaper, Canada seems to be on the front page here in the United States. You served as Prime Minister for 9 years, from 2006 to 2015, as a leader of the Conservative Party. Everybody knows that politics is a pendulum. And boy, did the pendulum swing the other way in 2015, all the way to the left, with a young, somewhat good-looking, good hair politician, Justin Trudeau, son of the Prime Minister, who took over. Somehow he lasted a little bit over 9 years, but Canada has clearly fallen out of love with Justin Trudeau, which has led in one way or another to him announcing his resignation this week. What does Trudeau's resignation mean to Canada?
Well, first, Gabe, just put that history a bit in perspective. You know, Trudeau came in 2015, won a big majority. We'd been in office for a decade. But he really ran as a centrist, didn't run as a far leftist, tried to convince everybody that all the things they liked about our government would be maintained and a few things would be changed. Of course, the government then went to the far left almost immediately and has since lost its majority in Parliament in 2019 frankly lost its majority in two consecutive elections that I personally think our party should have won, but he actually had his wings clipped. Unfortunately, then the far left party in Parliament fucked him up, which is why this thing ended up going 5 years longer than it should have, with frankly a lot of damage to the country. And look, I'm obviously a biased source, but I think if you look at the economic statistics, the damage is undeniable. So that's the situation we're in. Um, Look, the obviously bad news, but the good news is that a consequence of this has been that Canadians are really ready for a pretty significant change. And we have a strong young leader who's leading in the polls and is promising pretty dramatic change to get our economy back on track and frankly, get pride in our country back. Because one of the terrible things about this government has been not just its economic policies, but its pursuit a woke agenda that has really denigrated the country's culture and history and institutions. And I think Canadians, if anything, they've reacted more strongly against that than even the economic results.
It's interesting. We're seeing that kind of swing all over the world where people are rejecting that sort of leftist wokist ideology and saying, "Hey, how about us? Right? Focus on the
Right.
people here and not on the fringes." Pierre Poilievre is a really interesting character. Seems to be have tapped into the voice of young conservatism all over the world. Maybe with his social media and maybe also just how he deals with the media from in almost a very eloquent but also aggressive manner, which people react positively to all over. How much do you think um, Trudeau's resignation has to do with the rise of Pierre versus the problems he was having within his own party? It seems like he's trying to blame it all on his internal struggles.
I do think, look, I do think more often than not, governments defeat themselves. And I certainly think that the plummeting of Justin Trudeau popularity is really primarily about his government, which has become very unpopular because all of the results of that government are bad. I mean, virtually everything has been bad. It isn't just the economy. It isn't just the anti-Canadian culture, but it's also just Canadian public services are not functioning properly. Our federal government has never really fully come back to work from COVID. Um, I say it's just a totally dysfunctional government, and as you point out, it isn't just that it became unpopular in and of itself, but to the point where Justin Trudeau has been forced out by his own party, and his own party lost confidence in him. So, look, that said, I supported Pierre Poilievre for leader. He was actually came up under me. I've known him since he was a teenager. He was a young, started as a backbencher in my caucus, eventually rose to be a senior minister in the government, and I supported him in the leadership race. And, he has done a great job of mobilizing a big segment of Canadian public opinion against the Trudeau government, giving them an alternative, and quite frankly, starting to paint a picture of a very different agenda for the country. So I think he also deserves credit, but say Trudeau largely did it to himself. But I do think Pierre deserves a lot of credit, and I'm very, very confident that he will be the next prime. Or I should say that he will be the next government, not the next prime minister. Liberals will choose. They're right now in the process of choosing a new leader. That leader will likely be prime minister for a few weeks, because the first thing the leader will have to do is either call Parliament back or call an election. And if he calls Parliament back, the government will almost certainly be defeated in the House, which in the parliamentary system means the government can't continue. It means it has to call an election. So either call an election by choice or he'll be forced to call one. And then we'll have an election. And right now, Pierre is leading by 25 or more points. That gap will narrow, of course. But look, it would be a miracle for a new Liberal leader to win. They've got to, Gabe, you got to remember, they've got to fight it's the Kamala Harris problem, but even worse. This leader has to fight a leadership race. And of course, in the leadership race, will have to come out saying how much they believe in the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party's record. And then almost immediately go into an election where nobody wants that record to continue. And so the person's in an impossible situation. They have no time to set a new direction. Not only no time to set a new direction, they've got to actually, in many ways, affirm the current direction. And I just don't see. I'm a political practitioner, as you know, not just former prime minister. I chair the Global Federation of Conservative Parties. I watch politics around the world. It's just hard for me to imagine how they could reframe the government that's so unpopular and make themselves electable in the space of a few weeks. It would require a miracle on their part and some kind of disaster on our part. And Pierre is a smart enough politician. I just don't see those things happening.
Yeah, well, we need lots of miracles. That's definitely not one that we need.
Right.
First of all, just from a political perspective, watching Pierre's rise and reading about it in the last couple of weeks in depth, it's pretty incredible. I think he became a member of parliament at the age of 25, which is 20
Yeah.
years ago. And if
Yeah.
you watch videos of him even 5 years ago, he's nowhere near what he is now. He's really sort of developed in a way that's been powerful, and there is definitely a lot of energy around it.
Look, Pierre has always been, I can tell you, say, since I've known him as a teenager, he's always been smart. He's always known his own mind. He's always been an articulate, effective communicator. And when he was in my caucus, moving up, became a parliamentary secretary, ultimately a junior minister, then a senior minister. I tell people he not only always performed well in every job that I gave him, he always got better. Which is, I say, one of the criteria I used to have to evaluate people. Not just are they good, but do they actually get better? And he got better in every single job. But I have to tell you, in all honesty, he has become this amazing platform performer. Just holds audiences of thousands and thousands spellbound, with his delivery and stage presence. I never saw that capacity in him even 10 years ago. I mean, with all the improvement I saw, he was always articulate, a good speaker. But he has just become an incredible platform performer. And he is the first politician in Canada, not just first conservative. I think he's the first politician in Canada who's really social media age. He's understood. Certainly, my team, to be blunt, never really got into the social media age. He not only has got into it, he's perfected it. And his social media videos and presence has far bigger audiences than the traditional media in Canada, which is why he can ignore them or even from time to time attack them. He doesn't need them. Of course, they're not going to help him, but to the extent they are the real opponent, and they are the real opponent. I mean, and I shouldn't discount Mr. Trudeau too much. He did win 3 elections, but my view is he was never that great a politician. He just had this incredible media conglomerate behind him that, quite frankly, erased his every error, promoted his every asset, quite frankly, misrepresented his opposition, just literally propaganda. And so that's what he's relied on. That's not going to be good enough anymore. Those voices have lost their control of the public opinion landscape in Canada.
It's incredible. I know we're just your neighbor just to the south, but incredible to hear those issues being highlighted in Canada, because as you know, they're almost identical issues that we have here in the United States. And the more you dive in as you do to politics all over the world is getting much smaller. So the same problems and dynamics that we have in our countries, we see all over the world, always with a little bit of a twist, whether it's
Yeah.
the parliamentary system or you have a statewide media there, which is a little bit different than us. But it's pretty much the same
Yeah, look,
issue.
you see the dynamics everywhere. Same media dynamics, same cultural dynamics in Canada. Um, uh, I think what's different, if I can be blunt, Pierre Poilievre, although he has a populist style and has certainly caught the populist wave, and by the way, the trend around the world is the Conservative parties now represent less affluent voters. This is a complete change from when I was a young guy. When I was a young guy, generally speaking, the wealthier you were, the more likely you were conservative. Nowadays, everywhere, the more wealthy you are, the more likely you're liberal. And so that's, that was changing when I was in politics, when I was prime minister. I in fact repositioned our party as a populist conservative party. But that trend has really continued now. The working classes in Canada are overwhelmingly conservative. Elites are overwhelmingly not conservative, often anti-conservative. And so that's all changed. So Pierre's caught that wave. Pierre is a populist by style. He comes from a middle class family, but he is a much more, to be blunt, Gabe, he's a much more orthodox conservative than Donald Trump. And he's a much more disciplined campaigner. And he is, frankly, much more of I think will prove to be much more of a disciplined administrator. He is, in many ways, in terms of substance as opposed to style, he is actually much more of a traditional conservative politician than Donald Trump is. And Donald Trump's populism, and kind of uh, unconventional nature is not just a matter of his performance, his campaign performance. We saw that in government. I say Pierre will be, I think, actually much more orthodox in terms of economic policy and other such things.
One thing he can take from Trump's campaigning style is that I think the voters all over the world, definitely in the Western world, appreciate authenticity more than clean lines and perfectly rehearsed narratives. When I was thinking of the switch back and forth between your government and Trudeau's government, it reminds me of when Biden got into office here. The first thing he did was he reversed every executive order, or almost every executive order that Trump had put into place, and kind of started from zero. What policies did you put in place that you saw kind of evaporate that you want to see come back into play in Canada if we see a victory from the Conservatives again?
Well, I think there's two that really stand out on the economic front, Gabe. First of all, one of it's like the comparative advantage of Canada is that while we are an advanced industrial society and democracy with, the full range of economic attributes, all the way from primary industries to the most advanced technology, our country has an unparalleled comparative advantage in its resource base. And we have energy, critical minerals, resources of all kinds. We have probably the largest overall resource base of any country in the world, even greater than Russia in terms of its diversity. Well, at the same time, being a rule of law, stable jurisdiction, far removed from conflict zones. So this is a tremendous advantage of the country. Mr. Trudeau has denied that as an advantage and, in fact, gone out of his way to put impediments in front of the development of our resource industries, our mining, but especially energy. His goal has been to shut down the oil and gas industry. He's actually been quite plain about this. So Pierre is going to reverse those things. Canada will be back in the resources business in a big way, which is a great opportunity for us because, well, most Western countries have combinations of slow growth, debt, inflation, bad demographics. We have the easiest exit from that because we have this tremendous resource base that we can and products we can sell not only in the United States, but to growing emerging economies around the world. So that's the first thing. He's going to liberate that section of the economy. And the other thing he's going to do is start reversing the high tax agenda of the Trudeau government. And, Trudeau government came in like all left wing governments saying that, they were just going to spend a little bit more money and tax the rich a little bit more. And of course, they spent a lot more money and taxed everybody a lot more. And that kind of tax and spend agenda will start to be reversed. Obviously, those things don't occur overnight, but the direction will change very quickly.
And you famously, correct me if I'm wrong, balance your budget and lower taxes, and that was really some of your highlights domestically as Prime Minister.
Yeah, look, no, first of all, just in fairness, I came after a previous Liberal government that had been in office for 13 years, two different prime ministers, that was actually, by today's standards, a very centrist government, very much like a Bill Clinton type liberal. And so I didn't inherit a total economic mess the way Pierre Poilievre will. Uh, but, I was in office 2 years. We started with a surplus. We then had the global financial crisis. I ran a big stimulus program, ran a deficit. But after the crisis was over, we returned to a balanced budget and I lowered taxes. I took the federal tax burden to the lowest level it had been since the 1950s. And say at the same time, balanced the budget and made major investments into the big programs Canadians care about: healthcare, education, infrastructure. So, we had I think, a pretty strong economic record. Obviously, that has been obliterated um, in the past decade. On the other hand, we left the debt levels so low that even with the huge deficits we have, Canada's comparatively, fiscal situation is comparatively still not that bad to many others. So we still have some strengths, and as I say, Pierre will build on those pretty quickly.
Yeah, it seems like they got so comfortable with the successes they had under you, they being the Canadian people, sort of the government got comfortable and started toiling around with things that ended up not being beneficial. And now that's one of the reasons we're seeing things swing back 9 years later. Prime Minister, incoming President Trump, has focused a lot on Canada in the last several weeks, threatening tariffs of 25% unless there's a curb of the flow of drugs and migrants. He talked about spending that the U.S. spends, according to President Trump, about $200 billion a year protecting Canada. Went on saying the U.S. doesn't need Canada's lumber, cars, or dairy, and maybe even Canada should be a 51st state. A lot out there just in a couple weeks. What's your reaction to all of that?
Well, I must admit some degree of surprise. We've always, and I was, in fact, our Conservative Party is a very, pro-American, pro-Western party. I was probably the most pro-American prime minister in the history of our country. I view our relationship with the United States as one of Canada's great assets. You are our closest neighbor, our vital security partner, and not just our friend and shared comrade in the propagation of the values of the free and democratic world everywhere. And I've always viewed this as a tremendous partnership. I understand that Donald Trump may want some changes in trade arrangements, but I must admit to being shocked by some of the things he said. They're just not so. Um, First of all, we don't actually sell dairy into the United States, or sell almost none. So that's not true. Um, Canada, it is true that Canada presently has a modest trade surplus with the United States. The reason, Gabe, we do is because you buy so much of our oil and gas. In fact, you buy it at a discount to world markets. It's actually Canada that subsidizes the United States in this regard. And, so maybe my response is maybe Canadians, if Mr. Trump feels this way, should be looking at selling their oil and gas to other people. We certainly have always wanted to do some of that. Maybe now's the time to do it. And when we talk about subsidizing Canadian defense, I don't know what he's talking about. We have a shared defense of North America. The United States does that because it's in the vital interest of the United States. You want Canada to be a neutral country? Um, you know, I, I, I kind of don't understand. I just don't understand that. I don't understand that argument. There's many things he's saying. Even when you talk about migrants, first of all, there's no major migrant flow from Canada to the United States. You've obviously got an enormous problem on the southern border. By the way, I'm completely sympathetic with Donald Trump's position on this. I thought the policy of open borders of the Biden administration was disgraceful. I mean, I think it was a violation of President. I know Joe Biden personally. I like him, but it was a violation of his fundamental duties to the country. And of course, President Trump wants to change that. There is no migrant flow happening from Canada to the United States in any significant numbers. And I'm going to tell you right now, drugs, guns, crime, most of those things flow north, not south. A lot more flows into Canada from the United States than flows out of it. So Like, I have a real problem with some of the things Donald Trump is saying. It doesn't sound to me like the pronouncements of somebody, I say wants a better deal or whatever, fine. But it doesn't sound to me like the pronouncements of somebody who's a friend, a partner, and an ally, which is what I've always thought the United States is for our country.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, with regards to migration, obviously, it's nowhere near what's happening in the southern border, but we do have the records are they're at record level crossing from Canada into the United States. It's still far lower than
And so some
in
are
the southern
crossing the
border.
other way too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of work to do. From where I sit, I think there might be something there of trying to push Trudeau out the door and just trying to show that Trudeau won't be able to hang with the president.
Yeah,
Um,
look, I have no doubt that there's clearly animosity there, and for good reason. I mean, Mr. Trudeau's conduct with Mr. Trump on numerous occasions when they were in office together was not professional, and I can understand why there's some animosity. But look, whether or not we have Mr. Trudeau as our prime minister is our choice as Canadians. We don't tell you who to elect as president of the United States. And so as much as I'm glad to see Mr. Trudeau leaving, this is not Mr. Trump's decision. It's the decision of Canadians. Ultimately was the decision of Mr. Trudeau's own party.
yeah. How did the Canadian public take when after the president made his initial comments, Trudeau came down to Palm Beach for a meeting and kind of came out there quickly? Didn't seem like much came from that. How was that perceived in Canada?
Look, I think in fairness to Mr. Trudeau, he was in a no-win position. If he went as he did, it would look like he was groveling, and he did. On the other hand, if he didn't go, it would look like, and he'd been invited, he was not paying attention to Canada's most important relationship, and one that that he had some repair work to do on. So I think it was a no-win for him, and it definitely did. It definitely did not help him. But be under no illusion. I mean, I know Donald Trump will like to believe that he's pushed Mr. Trudeau out of office, but let me assure you, it was Canadian public opinion and ultimately Mr. Trudeau's own party that pushed him out of office.
Yeah, one thing you said that I think I agree with is President Trump often will conflate the leaders and the country itself. So I think the issues that Trump has is with Trudeau or are with Trudeau, and they're valid. And because of that, he's going after Canada as Trudeau's the prime minister there. But look, these dynamics are looking to change. We are just days away. This will be aired, I think, the day before the day of inauguration. So we'll have President Trump will be back in office, and if everything lines up, and we know in politics making predictions is impossible, but it looks like if everything lines up, we'll have a conservative party with Pierre Poilievre as the prime minister of Canada for this
Probably
next.
by early May is my guess.
Okay, but by early
Yeah.
May, just final question: how do you think Pierre will handle a Trump administration?
There's two things that unite. Conservatism. I always tell people that the left is the same everywhere in the world. It believes all the same things at the same time. Conservatism is cultural. And conservatives are kind of different everywhere in the world. And in Canada, we have, Canada's a complex country culturally. We have an East and a West. We have a French and an English. And there's different conservative traditions in Canada. And, I united them all in one party. But there's two things that those traditions share. One is a strong belief in Canada's federal system, that not everything can be run from a central government, that our provinces need to be strong. The other fundamental conservative principle is that we want to work and have good relationships with our major allies in the world. We're a pro-Western, we're pro the promotion of freedom and democracy. We believe in the traditions of Judeo-Christian Western civilization and the free and democratic world. And those are the things we stand for. It's why we stand by Israel. It's why we stand by Ukraine. It's why we continue to maintain such strong relations with our mother countries of France and Britain. But also, first and foremost, why the preference of every conservative prime minister is to have a strong and abiding alliance, partnership, and friendship with the United States. So that will be the approach that Pierre Poilievre takes. But Gabe, if I can be frank with you, as in terms of the advice I'll give him, the advice I'll give the country, Our desire as Canadians, that we've had now for decades, to be strong and beside the United States, whenever we can be, that really is hinged on us believing that the United States is a friend. Not that the United States wants to conquer or annex Canada. And I think most Canadians are continuing to hope that Mr. Trump is joking. But if the United States actually threatens the sovereignty and independence of Canada, Mr. Poilievre will be forced to take a very different approach to Canada's place in the world. I hope that's not the true. I don't know why it would be. I don't think the American people are hostile to Canada or want to see Canada conquered or, as Mr. Trump said, forced economically to join the United States. I just don't think that's an agenda. But if it is, if it were to be, then Pierre Poilievre and frankly our entire country has a lot of thinking to do about where it goes from there.
Yeah, well, for me, I'm glad that we're going to have Pierre Poilievre there as a partner. I think there's a much better future and brighter future between our two countries with conservative leadership in Canada.
Yeah, Gabe, I just be clear, we want to be a partner. We are a partner, we're a friend and an ally, but we are an independent sovereign nation. And where Mr. Trump is wrong, there's almost nobody in Canada wants to change that. We have our own culture, our own history. We're very proud of it. Very proud of our relationship with the United States, but we are Canadian, not American, and we want to be friends, not as they say, not annexed.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, thank you so much for joining. I know you don't do a lot of media. It was super important to get your perspective on this critical issue for the United States and for Canada. Thanks so much for joining, and for everyone else, we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me.